Hello everyone, Maurice here, and today I'm bringing you a meta report for Axie Infinity Origins Season 6, the early rare era. So it is the start of a new season, so obviously there probably will be some new archetypes and some old one coming back as well. And you see here, well, the gist of it is that there are actually kind of 8 different archetypes on top, like in Challenger. So let's just get into the report. So first of all, this is the player base at the moment. In terms of at the moment means actually a day before, so day 6 of the season, and you can see that there are already over 35,000 players. Of course, a lot of them are slowly climbing or maybe only play a few games. Yeah, but let's just see how the player base will evolve in terms of how many number of players will play this season. They did introduce more new starter Axies, so that might attract new people. But having said that, though, I do feel like for Axie Origins, it's getting to a point where they do need some new content because for the previous few seasons, since season 2 really, it has been really more about small changes, making the meta more stable, which is good. Well, when I say stable, actually it means like balance. The meta more balanced. But the flip side is that there's really not much content, so it's always those same archetypes at this point. Of course, there's maybe a few new ones, but it will be good to really have more new content just so that existing players will stay effectively, right? So because for a lot of players, they might only want to play like one or two, or maybe even like a few archetypes, right? They're not going to play everything. That's because they might not be able to afford to buy Axies for every archetype. So yeah, so at some point it will get repetitive, just playing the same archetypes over and over again. So yeah, it'll be good to see. Hopefully, part upgrades will come soon so that you can use the existing Axies, but with a different, play style, or at least something different. Okay, so let's actually jump right into the report for this week, and here it is really. So actually, on the above 1900, there are really only a very few. You can see a very few matches because very few players get there. So I'll focus mostly on the challenger, which is above 1800. So there are maybe about 100 players up there, and you can see that actually over the board really, like actually even from 1400, it's actually quite similar. And 1400, I would say, is about top 1/5, well, actually maybe 1600 or something in terms of top players. So actually, yeah, around, you can think of it as like top 2000 players, right? And you can see the distribution is actually pretty similar across the board. And yeah, poison is the main one that people use, and then you see some triple R. Yeah, spikes is actually the one that's performing pretty well at the top. So like there's some signs that you can see where if there's an archetype that's concentrated more at the top, then that just means they're probably like have a higher power level. So spikes is definitely one. And then, yep, so I think I mentioned it. This poison, AoE, triple R, Leafy, Anemone. So that's the new one. Anemone is the new archetype. And you can see it's actually, it's quite stable, but it's getting there, I think. Sustain is still around. And as I mentioned, spikes, and then the last one is Sandal. Sandal is actually not that popular, but it is around. And then there's actually like a summon team actually up there as well at the top 100. And that was from day 6, of course. As the meta evolves and as we go towards the end of the era, new archetypes probably will pop up. Some of these less used ones might actually get more popular as people are optimizing those and maybe slowly coming to the top. So we'll see that in the next season. I mean, in the next report for this era. Okay, so let's just go into the overall win rates. So poison, yeah, I think actually across the board is pretty even. I must say that I should just really point out that the key ones I would say is Anemone at the top is I think performing pretty well, and also Spikes you can see is performing very well at the challenger level, and these of course you can think of it as those are the optimized version of the teams, right? Because by default, of course, and everyone is playing a suboptimal version Of course, then they will settle at a particular uh, victory star point, and that's why mostly it will be around 50%. Of course, you can see that some are just below 50%. Let's say Cuckoo Baba is one that, yeah, it's not really performing too well. But it's still, around. But you can see it's probably harder for those to climb. But the ones that are, best to climb, I feel like is definitely spikes if you get the optimized version, of course, and anemone. So these has the most potential, I feel, based on this data. Okay, so let's jump into the matchup, and I'm just going to scroll through these. Of course, if you're interested, do check out the blog post. Check out the description for the link for the blog post. So I'm just going to scroll through, for the different victory star brackets. And I do want to just focus on the top 8 popular archetypes. So first one is poison, and for each of the 8 archetypes, I do show an example, I would say, of the team, and you can of course check out Axies.io and Axieboo.com, right? Both of these are pretty good resources just to check out what teams people are using, or even like what runes and what items the top players are using, so that you can learn from those. Okay, so for poison, the typical setup is really Vinoki. I think it's a must, and then you have 2 poison, 2 reptile. Probably have Gila, right? So that's double Gila is probably like one of the most optimal, just because Gila now is just so strong, and once you put the poison, it just scales so fast, right, in terms of damage. So double Gila can be pretty good. In terms of runes, 1 Finoki Poison, 2 Poison Touch is, I think, the standard. And then for the rest, it's really mostly about the Viper's Venom, this Poison Vial thing, and then, of course, the Vitality. You do have the White Sage for Cleanse, and then the Black Sage for Dispel as well. So, yeah, that's basically the typical setup. Okay, in terms of the matchup, Poison is actually great against AoE, Spikes, Sandal. So yeah, Poison is actually in a pretty good state, I would say. The toughest one is actually Sustain in terms of the matchup, just because for Poison, Sustain usually take a lot of Silence Whisper, and just in general, like Cleanse and stuff, and also Cleanser. Now Sustain is definitely running Rosebud, that kind of thing, so making it hard to even stack up the Poison. So Gila is not going to do as much, and also, the Silence Whisper is going to heal back from the Poison. So that's the toughest matchup, I would say. And also Anemone is also can be a tough matchup for Poison, just because Anemone, actually a lot of the top teams run Sea Slug, which also cleanse as well, and also dealing damage, just because Anemone just deals damage very quickly. So it's really just an aggro team, and it's similar to Topaz, right, where a Poison used to struggle against Topazes because the damage just goes so fast, and this is kind of the same for Anemone. Okay, then we have AoE. AoE, the typical setup is a triple wing horn, usually the Tri-Feather and Cupid, and then of course, usually double or even triple earwing as well. So sometimes people want a Innocent Lamb on the Contel Axie instead of earwing, but there are also ones that run just 3 earwings. And in terms of the tail is pretty important. Usually is 1 Cotton Tail, right? And then 2 AoE attacks, like Grandma's Fan or Ranchu. Yep, so that's kind of like the standard setup. And yeah, not much to say in terms of the runes and charms, really. But the key difference really is that some runs Innocent Lamb so that you can get 2 Cotton Tail, or like maybe 2 Confident or other things, whereas some just run 3 Earwings. So that's the main change. Oh, and one thing I should mention is that Momo's dagger is very important in this, because of the change in the feather mechanic, and that's why AoE is coming back, is because now every time an Axie attack, then your other Axies with feather will also gain the feather bonus damage. And so why Momo Dagger is good is because it gives you the feather dagger, and that should count as an attack, and so it kind of scales up the bonus damage for the whole team, basically. So this is why it's just a pretty good to have, just because it just scales up the bonus damage very quickly for the whole team. In terms of the matchup, AoE is good against the Triple R and Sandal, I would say. Um, and the worst matchup is definitely Spike. Spike is really taking advantage of this kind of AoE, like multi-hit and or AoE kind of attack, just because you're going to proc the spikes, and it's just going to hurt a lot, right? If once you proc the spikes, create the blood spike, then tri spike is just going to do massive damage, and the spikes itself also deal a bit of damage as well, right? Uh, so yeah, so that's why AoE is really tough against spikes. Leafy could also be tough for AoE, maybe except for Challenger. So actually one thing I should mention is the Black Sage tag here. So you can see that the E-Wings, some will run the Black Sage so that you can dispel, right, the opponents like buffs, and because there's so many buffs based team, right? So I mentioned spikes already, of course AoE. So the mirror also is relies on the feather buff, and of course Leafy relies a lot on the leaf buffs and so on, and bubbles as well in general, right? It's like there's so many buffs that if you manage to remove them while attacking, of course it's gonna be an advantage. So that's why for Leafy, except for Challenger is actually okay against Leafy, but if you don't tech for against Leafy, then it could be tough for AoE, just because they can stack up the leaves very quickly, and then every turn they heal for like 40 for all the Axies, and makes the AoE a bit tougher to deal with in terms of dealing the damage. It's because they heal back with the leaves. Poison is also not so easy for AoE, I guess, except for Challenger. Again, right, for Challenger, things are just more optimized, and AoE is fast enough. Whereas if you don't have an optimized AoE team, then Poison might be a bit more difficult. Okay, next we have Triple Owl. So this one is, the key is basically have an Aqua with Bubble Shooter with the Triple Owl, and pretty standard, I would say. The Triple Owl with the Feather Fan as well, and then Tri Feather, and yeah, in this case, the horn doesn't really matter too much, but it's always good to have a good horn. But the key is have the Aqua mid with Triple R, and then two very good support Axes that basically is like sustain, right? In a way, right? It just protects the R by the mid the time to ramp up the R damage, basically. Okay, so not much to say. I think the still skin at the back is always very good. So the other thing I should mention is very important is that for the two support Axes, you should always have now it's called 3 turn taunts, right? The ants or cattails, just so that you can always redirect damage away from your mid. And the other thing is, of course, having some heals and also the cleanse and silence whisper, so that you can deal with poison. Okay, so in terms of matchup, Triple R amazing against sustain. Reason being, just like the scaling. Once you get to the late game, the scaling of the R is just so high compared to what the sustain can deal with. The toughest is probably AoE, just because AoE can go pretty quickly, and also it can deal damage pretty efficiently. And even if you shield one Axie, then they can choose to do AoE and kind of ignore your shield a bit, So the AoE has that option, and that's why it's harder for the Triple R's to deal with. Okay, next we have Leafy, and Leafy, there are actually two versions of it. I'll probably show both versions. The first one is the AoE version, so similar to basically the end of last season. There's the AoE Leafy with Buzz basically, and also Cupid. Cupid is actually quite good for the rare era, just putting weak on opponent is pretty good. And then in terms of tail, usually is the either double Nemo, one con tail. One con tail is a must, but it could be actually double con tail, or it could be that you have a Renchu as well. So so the different kind of builds, but basically it's an AoE Leafy build. The other one is the Tri-Spike Leafy build, which was very good at the end of last season's rare era. Okay, so it's really only for rare era. Maybe we can see more of this, like spikes, leafy kind of thing, in the epic or maybe even mystic era this season. But I think it's still hard to see if that works, is because previous season it doesn't really work, and there's nothing that has changed much, except of course for the, well, in this case, nerfs in the spears mechanic. So that's why it's probably going to be tough for this Tri-Spike Leafy team, this kind of Tri-Spike Leafy team uh, to perform after the rare era, but we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. But anyway, for the rare era, it actually has been pretty good. Traditionally, when I say traditionally, meaning from last season, and reason being is just a lot of those multi-hit and AoE kind of attacks around. Of course, we saw the this the triple R is one, but I think AoE is the main one, right? That really procs the spikes a lot, and then of course Leafy itself also does that. So there's just a lot of ways to proc spikes. So that's why, I'm going to talk more about spikes in a bit. But anyway, so these are the two ways to build Leafy teams, and uh, so okay, one thing I should mention is that one of the reason why the spikes are good in the rare era is because of the Viper's Venom, which actually put quite a lot of poison on. And it's just very efficient in terms of this damage. And for the spikes team also, the Gecko Eye helps with self-proccing so that you can scale up the Tri-Spike a lot better as well. Okay, so just in terms of matchup, Leafy is great against AoE, as I mentioned, especially the Tri-Spike version, I would assume, just because the AoE will have to prop the spikes, and then the Tri-Spikes or the Leafy will just deal a lot of damage. But as usual, it suffers. Like Leafy suffers from sustain, so it just has a very little way to get through sustain, really. So that's the tough matchup for Leafy. And Anenome might also be a weakness for Leafy, just because it's similar to how Topaz was good against Leafy, right? Anenome is really just dealing a lot of damage pretty quickly. So that's that. Okay, let's talk about Anemone. So Anemone is a new archetype, so I should first talk about, like, usually is triple Anemone, like with like each Axie have like both, like two Anemones. Of course, some might not have all 6 parts, but it should still work pretty well. So let's talk about that first. Anemone has a very big buff this season, which is that now it's a 1 cost and it's an 80 base attack card, which is already pretty good, and it has ambush. And I think this is why the Anenome team is so good, at least in the rare era, where having ambush means you can have the flexibility of hitting the back and the front, and that just means it makes it harder for our opponent to shield, to guess where to put the shield and so on. And also you can choose to target whichever one that's like more threatening, let's put it that way. So so it's having the ambush definitely helps. So okay, so it's not just that, of course, it's not just ambush, but it does have a downside, which is -10 attack when played. So every time you play a particular Anemone card, then that card will get -10. But more importantly is that it has +20 attack whenever an enemy actually dies. So you use like your other cards or even in Anemone to just kill an Axie, and once you kill one Axie, then each Anemone will be 1 cost 100, of course, other than the -10 attacks, right? And if you get to the late game where you kill both your or 2 opponent Axies and your opponent only have 1 left, then each Anemone is basically a 1 cost 120 base attack, right? Of course, you can scale it up with other things like charms and runes and so on. And of course, you always want to have vulnerable and even fragile. So that's why the sleepless, gyro, all those are pretty good as well. And yeah, Piranha also synergizes very well. And Sea Slug as well. Being able to cleanse is very important. So that's why this team is making it up there, and I think it's going to be a pretty strong and relatively easy to play, I would say. Of course, there's still a lot of skill involved, but I think it's quite a good team for beginners just to deal attack, attack, attack. So in terms of the tail, usually it's double Nemo tail and one cotton tail, so that you can keep up with the tempo of the other aggro teams. Okay, so let's talk about the matchup first. So for matchup, it's great against poison, right? That's why it's actually a pretty good archetype to climb because there's so many poisons up there, right? About 20 something percent. So good against poison, so that makes it a good way to climb, and also good against Leafy. So similar to it already has a topaz kind of vibe, right? It just deals a lot of damage very quickly, kind of thing. And actually I guess the difference is that for Topaz, you still need to have a bit of setup, right? So the first few turns is setup, but for Anenome, it's more like um, yeah, okay, I guess it's different from the Fury kind of vibe as well, because for Fury, it's more like a burst damage in one turn, but this one is just constant damage without even needing to scale it up, well, in the case of Topaz. So yeah, it's a pretty fun archetype, I would say. So good against Leafy is because damage goes pretty quickly. Okay, but at Challenger, Anemone might be a bit tough to go against Triple R just because the support Axies can be pretty good in the sense of they usually will have taunt and then they have the cleanser from Rosebud, so it's harder to put vulnerables or fragiles on, and so the damage is going to be a bit slower, and so it allows Triple R team to survive long enough, and then of course once you get to the late game, the owls will just deal so much damage. Yeah, so that's that. I think that's probably the only weakness so far for Anomaly teams. Okay, then let's talk about sustain. Sustain, of course, will always be there as long as the Blood Moon kind of mechanic is there, and as long as the shield mechanic is there, then sustain will probably still be there. So okay, of course, the new tech now is Rosebud. Rosebud is pretty much a must, just so that you don't get wrecked by things like just Deathmark, right? That's basically it. Of course, now it's still not easy to get Deathmark because the new epic charm is not there yet, right? The one that apply the Deathmark, but regardless. Yeah, sustain will probably just run a lot of Rosebud, so that it's just very hard for the opposing team to really put any debuffs on, especially Deathmark. So really pretty similar as before. One thing is probably that you see more of the Silence Whisper, so that because there's just so much poison out there. But other than that, it's pretty similar from before. So yeah, Cucumber Slice is also a pretty good one for against AoE because there are quite a lot of AoE these days as well. So yeah, that's why Sustain is still around. The tough matchup for Sustain is, as I mentioned, Triple R, but also Sandals as well. So I'll talk about Sandals later on. That's because Sandals can also deal quite a bit of damage. Yeah, of course, there are the good matchups are quite a lot, right? So Leafy, the Spikes, Anemone, and maybe even Poison, just because of the Silence Whisper. Yeah, so pretty good in terms of sustain. It's just hope you don't face Triple R or you don't queue into Sandal. So those are the two main matchups that sustain wants to avoid. Okay, then let's talk about spikes. So this is like a pure spikes, right? And it's basically like I would call it poison spike kind of thing, just because it's really like a poison team. But instead of a more passive poison team, it's more of an aggro poison team where you're just trying to deal a lot more damage. So again, like Vinoki poison, and double poison touch is still pretty good, just because you're actually applying poison pretty quickly on the opponent, even though you don't really have those so-called like poison kind of card. There's only one sidebar. But then of course you just run a lot of the Viper's Venom, especially on the Tri-Spike, but also on like other attack cards really, just so that you put a lot of poison on very quickly. And yeah, so not much to say really. A Giller could help, but doesn't have to have Giller. A Giller can deal quite a lot of damage late game just to finish off opponent. I think the main thing I should mention is one Cottontail, which I think is the standard for aggro team mostly. And yeah, so of course the Gecko Eyes for self-proccing the spikes is always good. Yeah, so yeah, in terms of runes and charms, that's yeah pretty much it. Of course, having the Black Sage to remove the buffs is always good, and then just Vitality at the front. Okay, so in terms of the matchup, as I mentioned already, AoE and Leafy, those two are pretty good for spikes because those two will proc the spikes very quickly, right? Their main plan is really just to attack, right? And they deal so many multi hits or and AoE attacks that it will just proc the spikes very quickly. And the tough matchup is, as I mentioned, sustain. That's because sustain don't really proc your spikes, so you don't really get much of value from the tri spikes, or not as much as the other matchup. And of course, Silence Whisper also makes it very hard for the poison to even be effective. Yeah, so yeah, that's the main matchup that Spikes is, I guess, struggling with. Okay, and then we have Sandal. So Sandal, pretty interesting, I must say. It's really the only one. Well, I guess Anenome might also run Nemo. So for this one, Sandal double, well, meaning the Nemo ears, Nemo tail is like the must in this way. So this is the one that I guess people feared most at the season 6, right? Given the changes with the energy fragment mechanic, but in this case, you can see like this is now the main strategy that uses this ramp to then deal massive damage. So how it works is basically you have the Nemo tails, Nemo ESs to ramp up to 4 energy, or be yeah, in maybe turn 2, turn 4 or something, right? So basically after the round 2, then you probably will be at 4 energy. And once you're at 4 energy, then you just have the energy advantage. You can deal a lot more damage. And of course, you have the Babylonia, you have the Sleepless to put on the vulnerable, and then just hit them with sandals. That's basically the game plan. Piranha also good just for a bit of healing, but also just scales well with the vulnerable. Okay, so that is pretty much the game plan, right? Just ramp, gain the energy advantage, and then just hit, 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 hit. Okay, so Sandal is actually quite good against Sustain, reason being it has the energy advantage a lot earlier compared to Sustain. So Sustain can only play 3 shield when they have 3 energy, while you can like do 4 attacks, right? And especially if you go early such that they might not even have drawn into the Rosebud, then and also there's just so many other cards that put debuff that maybe you can actually get through the Rosebud, like the cleansers, then you can just deal a lot of damage early game to just steamroll the sustain team. So yeah, that's one. Of course, it's not like every game, but it's just good against sustain. Also good against poison at challenger, just because it can go pretty quickly as well. Especially with the like energy ramp, of course. For the not so optimal Sandal team, below challenger, then it's a bit more even the matchup. In terms of the toughest matchup for Sandal is definitely AoE. All right, AoE also deals a lot of damage very quickly, and because actually Sandals requires maybe 2 rounds of setup. Okay, so that's actually not that it's quite significant just because you do need to just play Nemo ears for the first round or 2 just so that you can ramp. And so those 2 turns are actually pretty slow, and AoE can start doing damage pretty quickly, and it's really just a race, right? And usually AoE can win the race, but of course depends on the draw and everything. But AoE is pretty good against Sandal. Okay, and that is pretty much it, I would say. So it's good to see the revival of old archetypes, especially AoE, right, which kind of fell off pretty hard few seasons ago, and now it's making a comeback. Triple R kind of coming as well, but we've seen Triple R in Rare before. So and also good to see an addition of a new archetype, right? Anemone, and maybe Sandal as well. Sandal wasn't really competitive before, and now it's getting up there. So it's always good to see new archetypes, in the meta. So let's hope that we can keep the meta diverse, especially for the whole season, hopefully, right? So that we can have a more fun game in terms of like every time you queue, you have a different matchup. Yeah, that's always good as compared to a few seasons ago where you always just face Topaz or something. But having said that, is getting to a point where I do feel like, yes, as I mentioned, it can be a bit repetitive for players who have been playing for quite a while, just because it's always the same old archetype. Maybe you have like one or two new ones, and yeah, if you are just gonna play the same team again, it's probably gonna feel the same. So let's just hope that they will really have some more new content coming up, not just like small adjustment, but new content so that you know, I would say basically attracting back the returning players. I think that's the main thing because I do know people who have dropped out of the game just because there's really not much new things, and maybe the existing team they've already played that team for many seasons, and if that hasn't got any changes, then it's kind of the same thing again. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. So yeah, good luck in the arena, and I'll see you in the next video.